I am an author and illustrator of picture books, and my name is Jon Klassen. I became a picture book artist kind of through a back door. I didn't know it was a job, and I was working for animation studios, doing sets and props and design work. But my interests were getting simpler, and I began to make work that looked simpler, but not having any reason to make that work. And I would post it on the internet, and slowly children's book illustrators would write me and say, you should do books. This looks like children's books. I also liked drawing letters and putting them next to the pictures, but again, I wasn't thinking about books. It was sort of a weird, dreamy reason why. And as soon as I started actually doing books, getting jobs to do books very slowly, it felt like coming home very much. It felt like reasons I didn't understand for why I'd been doing things the way I'd been doing them suddenly found one big home. I think visually my books are very simple. I try to keep them that way. When I write them myself, they're especially simple. When I get work from other places, when someone else writes the book, I get more complicated. But work for myself, it gives me permission to be very simple. And because of that, in order to give myself permission to be simple visually, my stories are usually more complex. They're highly emotional. But the characters don't look emotional. They have to look very still, but they're going through a lot of emotion. And the contrast in that they're simple and yet very emotional, that's usually where I end up with my own work and my own books. I use a lot of different materials. I wasn't trained to use paints and inks and things. I went to school for animation, and that's a lot of drawing with pencils. And so when I started doing books, I was pretty intimidated by all the materials. And because of that, I don't dedicate myself to any specific ones. I try a lot of things out and just see what works. How I work with them, though, is that I like to make pieces of all the pictures. My pictures for the books don't ever exist in one spot. I make pieces of them and then assemble them later. And what that allows me to do is that I can make, if there's a tree, I can make 10 trees and then choose my favorite tree of the 10. And then if there's a dog, you draw 10 dogs and you do the same thing. I think that this is partly because I don't feel totally in control of the drawing. I like happy accidents, and but in order to choose a happy accident, your favorite happy accident, to set up a process for that. That's how I work with most of the books. Slowly I'm getting braver to make more than one piece at a time so that the stakes are higher. But it's very relaxing to work the way that I've described, because you can make lots of accidents and then know that you have control later. It's a little like photography, where there's one stage where you take the picture, but then you have the dark room later to develop the picture and to control what it is you're going to enhance or emphasize. And that's how I like to treat the artwork too. Usually the artwork that you see here, where you can see the paper and the inks and everything, I'm looking for noise and texture, but I want to pop that later. I want to enhance what's on the page. What's on the page is I'm almost never happy with. I need to be able to exaggerate it. My latest book that will be out is called The Skull, and it's based on a folk tale that I read about a little girl who finds a house in the woods and there's a skull living inside of it. It's the first story I've ever adapted that I didn't write myself, and it's the first story that I've written narration for. Usually my writing is only dialogue and there's no narration. I've been very afraid of narration for some reason. I haven't figured out why. But because this story is somebody else's, I think it made me a little braver. I changed a lot of the story, but it's also a story for slightly older kids and a narrower audience than normal. Picture books, I find, have to be very broad most of the time. When you present picture books or when you see who's buying them, people are buying them for babies and they're also buying them for grade school children. And so how do you capture that whole age range? It's difficult, and I think it freezes you up and makes it hard to make a new book But with the skull, I knew it was specifically for a certain age of kid, and that was really interesting to know that it's much narrower with this one. It's longer, it's 115 pages, but very simple. I always appreciated, especially with scary stories, and this is a scary story, I think, if the letters are big and the pictures are on every page, the child knows it's for them. They don't feel like they've gone too far ahead of themselves. You want to make sure that aesthetically it looks welcoming to them. Even if the story might be challenging, if it looks like it's designed for their age, they're brave and they'll follow you and they feel safe. And that was very exciting to design, even to sort of conceive of in a broad way. But I'm very excited for it. I think it's fun to do a scary story. They were always my favorite when I was little. And I was a nervous, afraid child, but scary books in particular, I was very brave with, and so it's fun to do one. I feel very lucky to be working in books. I think it's, you can make things relatively fast, and so you can try different directions out. After this book that's coming out, The Skull, I'm trying books for babies, very young readers, which is a whole different area, but it's also very narrow. And those books don't have to be stories, and I've really been interested in that. I like storytelling and I like figuring out stories, but books for very young kids are supposed to be more like poems or songs. They just are supposed to satisfy the audience in a much more abstract way. You just want them to turn the page. You don't need them to understand the whole book as a shape. That's a different problem to solve, but it's really interesting, and if you get it right, it can be almost like a dream, and it's very rich. Even if the books are simple, which they ought to be, I think, just to grab a very young viewer, the simpler they are, the more abstract they can be. I've really been enjoying it. So I don't know if we'll move around, if there'll be older books and then younger books and then picture books in an alternating way. That seems to probably be what will happen. But I'm hoping to do many more books. It's a great job. I love it.